I still remember the smell of Guadalcanal. It was the kind of smell that clings to you for life. Wet soil, salt, sweat, and decay, all mixed into one breath of air so heavy it almost felt alive. My name is Charles Brush, Captain, Company A, 1st Battalion, 1st Marines. Back in August 1942, I was 30 years old and thought I knew what war was. I'd been trained to fight, to lead men, to keep my composure under fire. But Guadalcanal would teach us what war really meant. The kind that stripped a man down to bone and will. When we landed, most Americans had never even heard of the place. It was just another name on a map, a green speck somewhere in the South Pacific. But we knew this island mattered. If we could hold it, we'd stop Japan's advance toward Australia. If we failed, the Pacific would belong to them. We were the first American division to go on the offensive in that war, and there was a kind of pride in that, mixed with fear we didn't dare admit. The jungle swallowed everything, sound, light, even courage. The air was so thick with humidity you could wring it out like a towel. Mosquitoes came in clouds, biting through our uniforms, every step squished underfoot, mud sucking at our boots. The nights were worse, black as ink, full of whispers and movements that could have been the wind, or something else. That first week I kept thinking of how quiet it was. Too quiet for a war. We didn't know it then, but the quiet was only the deep breath before the storm. I can still see it now when I close my eyes, the faces of my men, sunburned and tired, watching the horizon as if expecting it to strike back. We were just kids, really. Some barely out of high school. And yet, we were about to open the first real chapter of America's war in the Pacific. When people ask me what Guadalcanal was, I tell them it was Pandora's box. Once we landed, there was no closing it again. What came out wasn't glory. It was fear, mud, and death. But somewhere in that chaos we found out what we were made of. This is my story. The story of the first time we faced the Japanese on equal ground, and the night they learned that America had come to fight back. August 7th, 1942, the day we came ashore at Lunga Point. The sky was the colour of lead, the kind of grey that made the ocean look almost black. Rain drifted in thin sheets, blown sideways by the wind. We could hear the distant thump of naval guns behind us, and the crackle of machine guns somewhere ahead. But mostly it was the sound of engines and men shouting over the surf. I remember standing at the bow of a Higgins boat, heart pounding, salt spray in my mouth, and thinking, this is it, we're really doing it. When the ramp dropped, we hit the water waist deep and pushed forward, rifles held high. There wasn't much resistance, just a few scattered shots from the tree line that stopped as quickly as they started. The Japanese had already fled. We didn't know why at the time. Later we learned most of them were construction workers and a few naval troops caught off guard. They had vanished into the jungle, leaving everything behind. The place looked like a ghost work site. Bulldozers half buried in mud, trucks with keys still in the ignition, sacks of rice torn open and scattered across the ground. I picked up a helmet with Japanese writing on the inside and wondered what had happened to the man who wore it. Maybe he was watching us from the trees. The air was thick with the smell of oil, seaweed, and diesel. We moved inland cautiously, expecting an ambush that never came. Then we saw it. The airfield. A wide, flat strip of dirt carved from the jungle, still unfinished but large enough for fighters and bombers. Our engineers were quick to recognize what it meant. If we could finish it, we'd have control of the skies for hundreds of miles. At the time, none of us realized it would become the center of the entire campaign. That strip of ground would decide who owned the South Pacific. We set up a perimeter around the field, digging in wherever we could. It wasn't glamorous. Mud, sweat, mosquitoes, and the constant hum of engines, but it was ours. I remember one of the engineers saying, we ought to give it a name. Someone suggested Henderson, after Major Lofton Henderson, a Marine aviator killed at Midway just 2 months before. It felt right. The name carried weight, like a promise. Within days, the bulldozers we'd captured were roaring again, this time in American hands. As I watched them clear the jungle, I realized we were building more than a runway. We were building a foothold, the first in a long war that was only beginning. Looking back now, I can still see the rain hanging over the island, hear the crash of waves behind us, and feel the strange mix of fear and pride that comes when you know you're standing on history's edge. From the beach that night, we could see the western sky burning. At first, we thought it was lightning far out at sea, flashes lighting the clouds. Then the horizon started to glow red, and we knew it wasn't weather, it was war. The sound reached us a moment later, low thunder that rolled across the water. Word spread through the camp. Our ships were under attack. Savo Island. None of us knew the name then, but by morning it would be carved into our memory. We stood on the shoreline, staring into the dark, watching the sky pulse with fire. Somewhere out there, 4 of our heavy cruisers, USS Quincy, Vincennes, Astoria, and the British Canberra, were being torn apart by Japanese shells. We couldn't see the ships, only the glow that rose and faded like the heartbeat of the sea. Later we learned that more than 1,000 sailors died that night. The radio was silent. No messages came through. One of my men asked, "Captain, are they coming back for us?" I didn't have an answer. The next morning the beach was empty. No ships, no smoke, just the endless ocean stretching west. Supplies still stacked on the sand, crates half open, fuel drums waiting for someone who wouldn't return. The Navy had pulled back, taking what they could and leaving us with what little remained. It wasn't their fault. They'd done their part, but we were alone now. Standing there, I felt something shift inside me. Fear, yes, but also clarity. No one was coming to save us. We were the front line of America, and if we failed, there was nothing behind us but the Pacific. That day we stopped thinking of Guadalcanal as an operation and started thinking of it as survival. The men worked harder, dug deeper, fortified every inch they could. You could see it in their faces, no talk of going home, just quiet resolve. Every crate of ammunition, every can of beans became precious. When night fell again, we looked out toward that same dark horizon, half expecting to see it flare up once more. But the sea was calm, deceptively calm. I remember thinking how strange it was, standing on a tropical island with sand between my boots, knowing that just beyond the horizon, the might of the US Navy had been humbled in less than an hour. It didn't make us hopeless. It made us determined. From that night on, Guadalcanal belonged to us alone. Guadalcanal didn't need guns to kill a man. The jungle did that all by itself. The air was so thick with heat and moisture that every breath felt like swallowing warm water. The ground never dried, mud clung to our boots, leeches clung to our legs, and the mosquitoes came in black clouds that never stopped. We rubbed insect repellent until our skin burned, but it didn't matter. The bites swelled, festered, turned into open sores. At night, the sound of insects drowned out everything, a constant high-pitched hum that got into your head. The rivers looked clear and inviting until you learned they were full of parasites. A few men tried washing in them. By the next week they were down with dysentery or worse. The rain came every afternoon, heavy and hard, and when it stopped the air didn't cool. It just steamed. Everything smelled of rot, wet wood, fungus, sweat, and death. Sometimes you'd catch a whiff of something sweet and realize it was a dead body buried shallow under the mud. Malaria hit us first. One by one, men began to shake uncontrollably, teeth chattering even though the heat never dropped below 90. The corpsman handed out quinine, but there was never enough. Then came jungle rot, skin infections that ate right through flesh. I saw one kid's boot fill with blood and pus before he even felt it. Food ran short. Rations were canned meat and hard biscuits that melted into mush. We boiled rice taken from the Japanese stores, sometimes with worms floating in it, and ate it anyway. After a while, you stopped caring. The jungle didn't just sap your strength, it ate at your mind. We started to fear it more than the enemy. At least the Japanese made noise, the jungle didn't. It waited. It swallowed sound and movement until you couldn't tell if someone was behind you or if it was just the wind through the vines. I used to lie awake at night, staring into the darkness, listening to the rain slide off the canvas of my tent, thinking that if hell had a climate, this was it. But somewhere in that misery, we adapted. We learned to fight the way the jungle fought, quiet, patient, merciless. We moved slow, stayed low, struck fast. We learned to disappear like the shadows under the trees. In time, the jungle stopped killing us so easily. We became part of it, and that, more than anything, kept us alive. The word came down one humid afternoon. Japanese troops had landed east of us, near Taivu Point. We didn't know how many, but intelligence said they were veterans from China. part of a unit under a man named Colonel Ichiki. The name didn't mean much to us then, but we'd soon remember it. They were said to be battle-hardened, disciplined, and utterly convinced of victory. We knew what that meant. These weren't the half-trained garrison troops we'd pushed off the beaches. These were killers, and they were coming for us. The air around camp seemed to grow heavier after the news. Men spoke in low voices, checking rifles, cleaning machine guns that didn't need cleaning. I walked the line along the Ilu River, though we all called it the Tinaru by mistake, and watched my Marines dig in. The river curved like a snake through the jungle, shallow near the mouth with a sandbar that led straight toward our perimeter. If the Japanese came that way, it would be a killing field. Colonel Clifton Cates ordered Lieutenant Colonel Leonard Cresswell's battalion to hold the line. We built interlocking fields of fire, machine gun nests and foxholes deep enough to hide from artillery. The Browning M19 or 17 water-cooled guns were set up in pairs so that one could fire while the other cooled. I still remember the hiss of steam when the barrels overheated. Behind them, we placed our 37 mm anti-tank guns loaded with canister rounds, giant shotgun shells packed with hundreds of steel balls. Nothing could survive that at close range. The men worked through the night digging, wiring, setting stakes. By dawn, the defences looked like something out of a manual, if manuals ever captured the smell of sweat and mud. We were ready, or at least we told ourselves we were. But readiness doesn't stop the waiting. Every rustle in the jungle made us tighten our grips. Sometimes the wind would move the palm fronds just right, and 20 men would swing their rifles toward the darkness. Hours passed, then days. No attack. Just the endless hum of insects and the heat pressing down like a hand on your neck. Then one night, our scouts brought word. Movement in the east, flashes of light near the river mouth. That was all we needed to hear. I checked my watch, but time had lost meaning. We didn't know when they'd strike. We only knew one thing for sure. They were coming. The night they came was the kind of darkness that swallows everything. The sky hung low and heavy, clouds pressing down like a lid. Rain drifted through the palms in slow sheets, hissing on the leaves. The air felt charged, the way it does before a storm or a battle. Around midnight, one of the scouts came running, breathless, eyes wide. "They're coming," he said. A few minutes later we heard it too, the faint rustle beyond the river, then the sudden roar of voices. The Japanese were charging, screaming like demons, their cries rising over the rain. It wasn't human. It was like the jungle itself had come alive, howling. They came straight across the sandbar, hundreds of them, rifles raised, bayonets gleaming in the flashes of lightning. You could almost admire the courage, men running headlong into machine gun fire, shouting as if their voices could stop bullets. We opened up. The Browning M1917s came to life, their barrels glowing in the dark, water steaming around them. The sound was deafening, a steady hammer of death. The first wave dropped before reaching the middle of the sandbar. The second wave stumbled over the bodies of the first. Some kept coming, crawling, throwing grenades that rolled harmlessly in the mud. The 37mm guns joined in, firing canister rounds that shredded everything in front of them. It was like watching a scythe sweep through tall grass, except the grass screamed. The smell hit next. Gunpowder, sweat, blood, and the sickly sweetness of death beginning. The flashes from our guns lit up faces twisted in fury and pain, then vanished back into blackness. Time lost all meaning. It was just noise and motion and smoke. Every few minutes the attack paused, and the silence felt worse than the gunfire. Then the shouting would rise again, and another wave would come. One of my gunners, hands blistered from the hot grips, muttered, "They just keep coming." And they did, again and again, until even fear ran out, and all that was left was the mechanical rhythm of loading and firing. Toward dawn the attacks grew weaker, scattered. The jungle that had roared all night went still. When the sun finally rose, it revealed what we'd done. The sandbar was carpeted with bodies, hundreds of them, tangled together, uniforms torn, faces still twisted in the effort of the charge. The river that had run clear the day before was now dark and slow, carrying pieces of helmets, rifles, and men downstream. Smoke hung low over the water. We stood there in silence, too tired to speak, our ears still ringing. For the first time since landing on Guadalcanal, I understood what real war looked like and smelled like. When the sun rose over the Teneroo, it brought no warmth, only light enough to see what the night had done. The air was heavy with the smell of death, thick and sweet, clinging to everything. The river moved slow, choked with debris, rifles, helmets and bodies tangled in the roots along the banks. Some floated face down, some stared upward with empty eyes, mouths still open as if trying to finish a last shout. The flies had already found them, a black shimmer that moved like smoke. We walked among them in silence, boots sinking into wet sand stained dark with blood. I had thought of the Japanese as something otherworldly, demons maybe, the way they screamed and kept coming. But that morning, I saw them for what they were, men. Young men, not much different from us. Their uniforms were torn, their faces slack with exhaustion and disbelief. Whatever spirit had driven them across that sandbar had died with them there. Of the 917 who had landed 2 nights before, more than 800 were dead. Around 120 survivors, most of them cooks and signalmen, had never even made it to the fight. They slipped away into the jungle, wounded and starving. Somewhere among the dead was Colonel Ichiki. We found his flag burned, and what was left of his sword near a shallow pit where he'd made his last stand. Some said he'd shot himself after burning his colours. Others swore he died leading a final charge. I don't know which version is true, but I like to think he chose to face us. There was a kind of tragic dignity in that. War strips away everything except the bare truth of men, courage, pride, and sometimes the foolishness that binds them. I remember standing there, looking down at that beach that had become their grave, and feeling no triumph, only pity. These weren't monsters. They were soldiers who believed they couldn't lose, and in one night that belief had been shattered. The jungle was quiet now. No shouts, no gunfire, only the buzzing of flies and the soft slap of water against the shore. I looked at the faces of my men, all of us covered in grime and sweat, eyes hollow from what we'd seen. None of us cheered. There was nothing to cheer for. We'd survived, yes, but so had the knowledge that we'd crossed some line that could never be uncrossed. That was the morning I first saw the myth of their invincibility die. After Teneroo, the island went strangely quiet for a few days. We used that time to fortify, bury the dead, and repair what the battle had broken. The engineers worked around the clock at the airfield, finishing what the Japanese had started. By mid-August, Henderson Field was finally operational. The first planes came in battered and dusty, landing between piles of coral and mud. We called them the Cactus Air Force after the island's code name. Their pilots slept in tents beside the runway, ate cold rations and flew until their fuel or luck ran out. There were no hangars, no control tower, just a strip of dirt hacked out of the jungle. Yet every morning as the sun came up you could hear the roar of engines echoing through the palms. Wildcats, dauntless dive bombers and P-400s clawed into the sky, their wings brushing the mist. It was a sound that made us feel less alone. From the ground we'd watch them disappear eastward, heading toward the sea where Japanese ships prowled. Sometimes we could see the explosions miles away, tiny flashes on the horizon marking where bombs had found their mark. Other times they came back riddled with holes, wheels barely holding, and we'd help drag the pilots from the cockpits grinning through exhaustion. Those men fought the war in the air the way we did on the ground, with grit and desperation. During the day, Henderson Field gave us life. The sky was ours, and the Japanese learned to fear it. No ship dared approach in daylight without being bombed or strafed. But when the sun went down, the island belonged to them again. The Tokyo Express, we called it, their destroyers running fast through the night, bringing troops and supplies. We'd lie in the dark and hear them out at sea, engines rumbling like distant thunder, the occasional flash of naval gunfire lighting the horizon. Sometimes shells landed near the field, sending up fountains of mud and coral. We couldn't fire back. All we could do was wait for dawn. When it came, our planes rose again to hunt whatever had slipped in overnight. That rhythm, daylight dominance, nighttime survival, became the heartbeat of Guadalcanal. By day, we ruled the skies. By night, the Japanese ruled the sea. And between the two, on that narrow strip of land, we learned to live one day at a time. We called it Edson's Ridge, but after that night, no one needed the name anymore. Bloody Ridge said it all. The evening started like so many others on Guadalcanal, hot and heavy, with the jungle sighing in the wind. Then the mortars began, Flares lit the sky in bursts of green and white, and for a moment it looked almost beautiful, like fireworks back home. Then came the shouting, the high, piercing cries of Japanese infantry charging uphill toward us. I was dug in halfway down the ridge, next to a machine gun team. The air filled with a snap of rifle bolts and the hiss of tracers. "Keep firing!" I heard someone yell, John Basilone, his voice raw, echoing through the smoke. He was a Marines Marine, firing one gun then another, moving from position to position as if he couldn't be killed. The enemy came in waves, bayonets flashing in the flare light. They moved fast, low, almost crawling, trying to break through the wire. We poured fire into them until the barrels glowed red. Mortars behind us thumped rhythmically, shells bursting just yards away. It was chaos, shouts, explosions, screams, but somehow it all held together, like a machine running on instinct. Our artillery from the 11th Marines answered every attack with precise, brutal timing. The ridge itself shook under the barrage. Dirt rained down, tree branches snapped, and still they kept coming. I remember reloading with hands slick from sweat and blood, my heart hammering so hard I thought it would break. A Japanese soldier broke through the wire near my position, and one of the boys took him down with a shotgun blast at 10 feet. The blast lit his face for just a second. He couldn't have been older than 19. The night dragged on, hour after hour. Each time the gunfire died, we held our breath, waiting for the next wave. When it came, it felt like the earth itself was rising against us. We fired until the ammo boxes were empty, then crawled for more, tripping over shell casings and bodies. At some point, fear stopped mattering. There was only the line and the men beside you. Toward dawn, the attacks faltered. The shouting faded into groans. The jungle went still except for the crackle of burning brush. When the first light crept over the ridge, it revealed a sight that would never leave me. Bodies everywhere, piled in heaps, sprawled in the kunai grass, tangled in the wire. Blood darkened the soil and steam rose where the sun touched it. No one spoke. We just looked at one another, too numb to feel anything but disbelief. When people later asked what Bloody Ridge was like, I told them, "Imagine hell on a hill and you'll be close." They called it courage, and I suppose it was. The Japanese fought with a kind of conviction I'd never seen before. They didn't retreat, they didn't surrender, they didn't even seem to fear death. They came on until there were none left to come. That was their strength, and the very thing that destroyed them. On Bloody Ridge, they kept attacking long after the battle was already lost. I watched them charge through machine gun fire, over piles of their own dead, as if pure willpower could change the outcome. Some made it all the way to our lines before falling. When it was over, 850 Japanese lay dead on the slopes. We'd lost 104 killed or wounded. Numbers on paper, but to us they weren't numbers. They were faces. The ridge smelled of cordite and blood for days afterward. The rain came, but it couldn't wash away what we'd seen. The men didn't talk much. No one celebrated. There was no victory cheer, no pounding on helmets like in the movies. Just silence. You could hear it in the mess line, in the foxholes, even in the laughter that tried to come and couldn't quite make it. We'd survived, but something in us had shifted. The Japanese had shown us what it meant to fight to the last breath, and part of us couldn't help but respect that. I remember looking down at a fallen soldier near the ridge, his hand still gripping his rifle, his eyes open, staring at nothing. He'd probably believed he was dying for something sacred, just like we did. War doesn't make sense when you see it up close. It's just young men dying far from home because someone told them they had to. After Bloody Ridge, we no longer saw the Japanese as faceless enemies. They were soldiers, trapped in the same madness we were. Fierce, disciplined, unyielding, but human. We learned that respect doesn't mean weakness. It means understanding what kind of enemy you face and fighting harder because of it. Guadalcanal didn't just teach us how to win. It taught us what victory costs, and that even courage, when twisted too far, can lead a man straight to ruin. I've fought many battles since, but that one stays with me, because on that ridge, amid blood and smoke, we learned to respect even those who fought against us. By October, the jungle had claimed more men than bullets. We were all thin, hollow-eyed, and worn to the bone. The heat never broke, the mosquitoes never stopped, and the smell of rot was everywhere. Mud, sweat, decay, and something you stopped trying to identify. We fought two enemies on Guadalcanal, the Japanese and the jungle was winning. Malaria hit everyone. You could spot it by the grey faces, the trembling hands, the eyes gone dull from fever. Our medics worked miracles with what they had. Quinine, plasma, bandages soaked through with sweat. They kept us alive, barely. But the Japanese, they had nothing. No medicine, no food, no supplies. The prisoners we captured didn't look like soldiers anymore. They were skeletons in torn uniforms, skin stretched over bone, too weak to stand. Some still bowed when we offered them water, hands shaking. They'd fight until they dropped, because that's what they'd been taught, to die before surrender. Many didn't even make it that far. We found them in the jungle lying beside empty rice tins, their rifles still clutched across their chests. It was a strange kind of horror, to see an enemy die not from battle but from hunger. We were sick too, but we had systems. Every few days, supplies came in, food, ammunition, medical crates. The Navy doctors knew how to use plasma to keep a man alive after he'd lost too much blood. We had morphine for pain, sulfur drugs for infection, and ships to carry the worst cases away. The Japanese had none of it. They fought with willpower and faith while we fought with logistics, and in the end, that made all the difference. Sometimes I'd look at my men, mud-caked, feverish, eyes sunken, and think, we're dying slower, that's all. But slower was enough, because behind every Marine on that island was a system that worked. Mechanics fixing engines, cooks boiling coffee, doctors keeping hearts beating. Behind every Japanese soldier was only his will, and even the strongest will can't fill an empty stomach. Guadalcanal taught me that war isn't just about courage or tactics, it's about endurance, about who can keep going when the jungle, the disease and the hunger all want you dead. In the end, we didn't conquer the island. We simply outlasted it. October came with rain and blood. The Japanese weren't done, not by a long shot. Word spread that General Hakutaki himself had arrived to command a new offensive. They were bringing everything they had: artillery, veterans from China, and the remains of the Kawaguchi and Nasu brigades. Their goal was simple: retake Henderson Field, no matter the cost. We knew it was coming. You could feel it in the air, the stillness before a storm, the kind that makes the hairs on your neck stand up. On the night of October 24th, the storm broke. It began with mortars, hundreds of them, pounding the perimeter. Flares burst overhead, painting the sky white. Then came the shouting. "Banzai!" The word tore through the rain like thunder. They came in waves, thousands of them, charging out of the jungle and across the muddy fields toward the runway. From my position along the defensive line, I could see the flashes of their rifles, the silhouettes of men moving low, bayonets glinting in the flare light. Our machine guns opened up. John Basilone was everywhere at once, feeding ammo belts, shouting orders, firing until his hands blistered. When one gun jammed, he cleared it, then ran to another. When ammo ran low, he carried boxes through open ground under fire. The men of the 164th Infantry had just arrived, fresh from the States, and they fought like veterans that night. Together, Marines and soldiers stood shoulder to shoulder, turning Henderson Field into a wall of lead and fire. The Japanese kept coming. They crawled through the mud, climbed over their dead, and threw grenades that burst among our foxholes. Some got close enough that I could see the whites of their eyes before they fell. The ground shook from the artillery. The smell of gunpowder, mud, and death filled the air. For hours it was chaos, shouts, flashes, screams, and the endless roar of gunfire. But the line held. Basilone's machine guns cut down charge after charge until the barrels glowed red and water boiled in the jackets. By dawn the attacks faltered, then stopped. The field was ours. When the sun rose, it revealed the cost: more than 2,000 Japanese dead, their bodies sprawled in the swamp and along the wire. Our losses were heavy, but nothing like theirs. We had held the airfield, but no one celebrated. Men sat in the mud, staring at nothing, faces streaked with soot and rain. Henderson Field still belonged to us, but it didn't feel like victory, just survival. And yet, as the first planes took off that morning, engines howling over the wreckage, I remember thinking, this patch of earth had just become the most expensive real estate in the Pacific. By November, the war had moved out to sea. From our foxholes near Henderson Field, we could see the horizon glow red at night, the sky pulsing with light from the great naval battles offshore. We listened to the reports crackling over the radio, Ships sinking, guns firing, the names of vessels we knew whispered like prayers and curses. It was the Battle of Guadalcanal, though we didn't call it that yet. To us it was just another night when the world burned. One message came through clearly. The battleship Washington had engaged the Japanese fleet at point-blank range. In less than an hour, she'd turned the battleship Kirishima into a floating furnace. Men said the ocean itself caught fire that night. When morning came, the smoke still hung over the water, and the news spread fast. The Japanese convoy had been destroyed. 11 transport ships, gone. Thousands of their soldiers drowned or burned before ever reaching shore. For the first time, the sea belonged to us. It didn't feel like victory, not exactly. Just a strange, heavy silence. The men stopped looking toward the coast for enemy ships. We knew they wouldn't be coming. No more reinforcements, no more supplies. Someone said quietly, "They'll starve out there," and we knew it was true. The jungle that had punished us would now finish them. At night the air stank of decay. The island itself seemed to be dying. Corpses, Japanese and American, lay half buried in mud or lost in the undergrowth. The smell never left you. It clung to your clothes, your skin, your memories. The guns fell silent, but death didn't. We still fired sometimes, patrols, snipers, small clashes, but the great battles were over. The enemy was fading, starving, melting back into the jungle. We could feel the shift, though no one said it aloud. The tide had turned. Guadalcanal wasn't just an island anymore, it was a symbol. We'd stopped the advance that had started at Pearl Harbor. For the first time since the war began, Japan was retreating. I remember standing by the shore one evening, watching the sunset bleed into the sea, and thinking how strange it was that something so beautiful could rise from so much death. The sea was calm now, ours again, but it had taken everything to make it so. By February the jungle was quiet again. The gunfire had faded, the shouting was gone, and the rain was the only sound left. We didn't know it right away, but the Japanese were gone, evacuated under the cover of night. After 6 months of killing, the island had finally gone still. We walked through the same trails where ambushes once waited and found only footprints and broken helmets. The trees were scarred by bullets, the rivers thick with mud, and the air still carried the ghost of smoke. Guadalcanal was ours. We had won. But no one felt like cheering. Most of us were too sick, too thin, too tired to care. Our uniforms hung loose on our bones. The smell of mould clung to everything. Gear, skin, memories. Some men smiled faintly when told the Japanese had withdrawn, but the smiles didn't last. Victory didn't feel like triumph. It felt like relief, and guilt that we'd made it when so many hadn't. We buried our dead beside the airfield they had fought for, marking graves with empty ration boxes and crossed sticks. The names washed off in the rain. War didn't make heroes, it made survivors. Standing there, watching the rain fall on Henderson Field, I realized we hadn't just fought the enemy. We'd fought the island, the disease, the hunger, and our own fear. And somehow, we'd endured. People back home would call it courage, but it wasn't that simple. We learned that courage alone doesn't win wars, systems do. Logistics, coordination, the men behind the front lines who make sure the guns fire and the food arrives. Guadalcanal taught us that wars are not just fought by soldiers, but by nations that can keep them alive. We learned to fight like the jungle, patient, relentless, silent when needed, deadly when it mattered. And we learned to fight for each other, not for glory but for survival. When the last transport finally took us off the island, we looked back through the grey rain. The shoreline was empty, the palms swaying in the wind, the same sound we'd heard that first night when we landed. Even now, all these years later, when rain hits the tin roof of my porch, I can still hear it. The rain of Guadalcanal, falling on mud, helmets, and ghosts. We won that island, yes, but what it gave us was something quieter, heavier, and far more lasting. The knowledge of what it truly costs to survive.